Then we come to postmodern architecture, where we're seeing a focus on meaning and symbolism, using a lot of the postmodern approaches to the world and trying to incorporate them into architecture. In a practical sense, this sometimes means, for example, mixing styles, where we'll have classical and modern brought together. Can mean other things as well. And we start with Pompidou Center in Paris. Here we literally see a building turned inside out. They've externalized or moved outside all the pipes, the ducts, the elevators, everything. Inside is a pure void, where there's no walls that are hollow and taking up space to run water pipes. They don't have all of the materials that we would expect inside a building. And this is a convention center. So by moving all of these elements, all the structural elements, all the stairways, everything else outside, they've opened the largest possible space inside to create the convention center. And at the same time, by flipping it inside out, they've made a convention center, which is oftentimes sort of the heart of a city or a neighborhood or an area, and they've made it a piece of art. They've made it attractive for people to come into, for people to visit. It's a draw. And the only thing on the inside is moving temporary walls. The sort of walls that you need if you're splitting it up, for example, having a couple of conventions at the same time. We also have an exterior that is whimsical, with these brightly colored escalators on the exterior. It looks playful from the outside. It almost looks like hamster tubes. If you've ever seen hamsters and mice in their enclosures and they'll have those tubes running everywhere, this really does remind me of that. Like you would see hamsters running around in it. But you don't see hamsters, you see people. Kind of an interesting way of looking at it. Then we have Frank Gehry, who creates, what are basically functional works of sculpture. And he creates the Walt Disney Concert Hall. Now, this concert hall is meant to suggest sails on a ship, but also the visual chaos of our time, the fact that we don't see a unified style because it's postmodern, and postmodernism by its definition is not a unified style. So it creates an immense sculpture in the urban landscape. By seeing this massive piece of architectural sculpture, we know immediately that it must be an art building. We are used to this by now. We've seen the Sydney Opera House or the Calatrava in Milwaukee. We've seen so many art structures, such as the Guggenheim and here the Walt Disney Concert Hall, where these exist outside of normality. They exist outside of what we would expect of any other structure. And in doing so, when they exist as sculptural architecture, they tell us almost immediately that this must be a special building, and most of the time that it's going to be a building tied to the arts. Because we have these high art ideals coming out in the architecture, in the form of the structure. It's also futuristic. It's in fact so futuristic to harken back to the style of futurism itself, although with a sense of irony. So this is sort of so futuristic that it's looking back at the 1950s ideas of futurism. But when it looks back at those 1950s ideas, it adds a sense of irony to it, because it's not trying to get across incredible progress. This is not, the age of the atom. Look at how much progress we make as we split the atom. This is looking back and taking some of those elements of 1950s futurism and giving it to us in a different form, basically taking it, turning it into this somewhat ironic sculpture.